A billionaire brought his assistant instead of his wife to a major event. What she revealed as revenge that night left everyone speechless. The skyline of Los Angeles stretched endlessly beyond the towering glass windows of Marcus Bennett's penthouse, a glittering expanse of wealth and ambition. The city pulsed beneath him, headlights weaving through crowded boulevards, distant sirens echoing between high-rises, and the low murmur of millions of lives carrying on in chaotic harmony. From this vantage point, Marcus felt like a king surveying his empire, a silent ruler of a world he believed revolved around him. He took a slow sip of his whiskey, the amber burn reminding him he was fully in control. Inside, the atmosphere radiated quiet sophistication. Smooth jazz drifted from hidden speakers, and the soft glow of recessed lighting cast a golden hue over carefully selected art and sleek modern furniture. Everything in Marcus's world was curated, every detail meticulously crafted to reflect success. It had taken him over 15 years to build this life, and he wasn't about to let anything or anyone derail his ambitions. Olivia Bennet sat across the room flipping through a thick financial report, her brow furrowed in focus. She was calm, composed, too composed. Her sharp eyes scanned the figures with the same meticulous care that had once made Marcus respect her back when he still believed they were a team. But lately she felt more like a polished ornament for his image than a partner. She still dressed flawlessly, still moved with the quiet confidence of someone who grasped the inner mechanics of the corporate world. But to Marcus, she had become routine. The steady buzz of his phone pulled him from his thoughts. He glanced down to see a message from Rachel Collins, his assistant. "Everything is confirmed for tomorrow's presentation. They're expecting big results." Marcus smirked. Rachel was sharp, driven, and understood the game in ways Olivia never could. She had a talent for reading people, for saying the right thing at the perfect moment. That was exactly who he wanted by his side. Someone who could close deals, not someone who fussed over details and long-term risks. "Marcus?" Olivia's voice was gentle but firm, pulling his attention from his phone with obvious reluctance. "I was reviewing the latest projections and I have some thoughts. There are a few key areas that might need a second look before tomorrow's presentation." Marcus sighed, already annoyed. He didn't bother to glance up. "I've got it covered, Olivia," he said, waving a hand dismissively. "Let's not overcomplicate it. It's a simple deal." Olivia paused, weighing her words carefully. Her lips parted slightly as if to argue, but she stopped herself. Over the years, she had learned it was pointless to push when Marcus had made up his mind. She simply nodded. "All right, Marcus, if you're sure." Marcus barely registered her response. His mind was already fixed on tomorrow. Rachel would be his secret ace, a calculated choice to impress the board and finally close the deal that had been dragging on for months. He was certain Olivia wouldn't handle the pressure or have the sharp instincts to navigate the boardroom politics. Later that evening, Olivia moved around the kitchen with quiet precision, setting the table with the same deliberate care she gave everything in life. Marcus leaned against the counter, watching her with cool detachment. "I've decided to take Rachel with me tomorrow," he said casually, swirling the whiskey in his glass. He studied her closely, waiting for a reaction. Olivia paused for just a heartbeat, then went back to arranging the silverware with practiced grace. "I see," she said, her tone giving nothing away. "If that's what you think is best." Marcus frowned faintly. No protest, no persuasion. He'd expected at least some pushback. A reminder that she'd been by his side since the beginning, that no one knew his business like she did. Instead, she only offered a small, unreadable smile that unsettled him more than he'd admit. "I hope it all goes well for you," she added, returning to her task with an eerie calm. For a moment, Marcus felt a flicker of doubt. Something in her reaction didn't feel right. But he brushed it aside. Olivia was always composed under pressure. Maybe she had finally accepted her place in his world. That night, while Marcus lounged in an upscale bar with Rachel, discussing strategies over overpriced cocktails, Olivia sat alone in the penthouse, gazing out at the sweep of Los Angeles lights. The soft hum of the city filled the room, but her mind was perfectly still. She reached for her phone and scrolled through her contacts until she stopped at one name. She hadn't called in years. A deep breath, a steadying pause, and then she pressed dial. "Hi," she said after a moment, her voice calm. "I think I'm ready to talk about that opportunity we discussed." The voice on the other end answered quickly, and as Olivia listened, a slow, satisfied smile spread across her lips. Marcus had always believed he was the only one pulling the strings, but she'd learned long ago that real power lived in quiet planning. Meanwhile, across the city, Marcus laughed at one of Rachel's jokes, completely unaware that his world was already shifting in ways he couldn't see. He was convinced tomorrow's presentation would be the pinnacle of his career. But he had no idea that Olivia had already started laying the groundwork for something far bigger, something that would force him to question everything he thought he knew about his business and about her. The next morning, Marcus woke up early, energized and certain of his success. Rachel arrived right on time, dressed to turn heads, her sharp eyes gleaming with determination. They exchanged a few last-minute notes over breakfast, while Olivia moved silently around them, like a ghost fading into the walls. "Wish me luck," Marcus said with a smirk, adjusting his cufflinks in the hallway mirror. Olivia only smiled, her face unreadable. "You won't need it," she said softly. Marcus left without looking back, his mind locked on his win. But as the door clicked shut, Olivia picked up her tablet and allowed herself a quiet, knowing grin. The game was only just beginning. The morning light spilled through the tall glass windows of the penthouse, casting warm streaks across the sleek, minimalist decor. Olivia sat at the breakfast table, her hands wrapped around a mug of coffee that had long since gone cold. Across from her, Marcus was a whirlwind of movement, checking his phone, adjusting his tie, skimming through slides on his tablet. The expensive scent of his cologne filled the room as he moved with the unwavering certainty of a man convinced he was in absolute control. Olivia watched him with detached calm. She had spent years standing behind him, giving advice, support, and unshaken loyalty. Now, watching him pace back and forth, it was as if she were invisible, a forgotten prop in the perfect image he'd built. "Make sure the team's tight on the numbers," Marcus said into his Bluetooth headset, pacing the length of the kitchen floor. "I don't want any surprises when we present." His voice was smooth, commanding, every word measured, every step deliberate. Olivia took a slow sip of her coffee. "I suppose I shouldn't wait up for you tonight," she said softly, breaking the steady hum of his pacing. Marcus glanced up, briefly distracted from his call. "Yeah, it's going to be a late one," he replied absently, his eyes already locked back on his screen. "Big day tomorrow, Olivia. Big things." She echoed him, her voice edged with something Marcus didn't quite catch. He was too wrapped up in his momentum to notice the subtle shift in her tone, or the way she studied him from across the table. Calm, poised, yet no longer the same. Marcus had made his choice. He had chosen Rachel. Young, energetic, ready to bend to his every whim. Olivia knew the second he waved her off with that familiar flick of his hand. Rachel was the future. Olivia was part of a past he believed he'd outgrown. But she wasn't about to let him discard her so easily. She set her cup down, reached for her phone, and scrolled through her messages until she found the number she'd dialed the night before. Her fingers hovered, then pressed the call button. "Good morning," she said when the line connected, her tone calm but certain. "Yes, I've made up my mind. Let's meet." "Today?" "Yes, I believe we have quite a bit to talk about." There was a pause, then the voice on the other end agreed, and Olivia's lips curved into a faint, satisfied smile. Noon works perfectly. Meanwhile, Marcus was already halfway out the door, his voice trailing behind him. "I'll see you later, Olivia. Don't wait up." She didn't answer. She didn't need to. By noon, Olivia sat tucked into a quiet corner of an upscale cafe, the kind of place she and Marcus once came to when they were young and still naive enough to believe that success wouldn't change them. She could barely reconcile that memory with the man he'd become. Across from her sat Jonathan Reed, a powerful investor she'd met years ago through one of Marcus's early ventures. He had always respected her strategic mind, something Marcus had long taken for granted. "You sounded focused on the phone," Jonathan said, his sharp gray eyes studying her closely. "What's changed?" Olivia stirred her tea slowly. "Let's just say I've realized that some doors don't stay open forever," she said smoothly. "And I don't plan on getting left behind." Jonathan leaned back, a knowing smile spreading across his face. I always knew you had more bite than people assumed." "What exactly are you proposing?" Jonathan asked. Olivia reached into her bag and pulled out a neatly organized folder, one she had quietly worked on for months, hidden beneath piles of Marcus's financial statements he never bothered to check. "A better deal," she said simply, sliding it across the table. "One Marcus is too short-sighted to see." Jonathan picked up the folder, flipping through the pages with growing interest. Olivia watched him steadily, her heartbeat calm but resolute. She had spent years shadowing Marcus, studying every move, memorizing every tactic, and now she was ready to play her own hand. After a long silence, Jonathan let out a low chuckle. "I have to hand it to you, Olivia. This is impressive. You're thinking bigger than I ever expected." Olivia allowed herself a small, measured smile. "I've had a lot of time to think." Jonathan leaned forward, his expression suddenly serious. "You realize this puts you in direct competition with Marcus." "I know," she said without a hint of hesitation. "And I'm ready for that." She wasn't sure if it was the years of being brushed aside, the quiet buildup of resentment, or simply the awakening that she was capable of more than she'd ever been allowed to prove. But something had shifted inside her. Marcus might have chosen Rachel, but Olivia had finally chosen herself. As the afternoon drifted on, Marcus sat in an extravagant downtown conference room, Rachel by his side, charming the board members effortlessly with her carefully polished pitch. He reclined in his chair, smug and self-assured, convinced he had finally surrounded himself with the perfect team. What he didn't know was that across the city, Olivia was laying the foundation for something much bigger, something that would upend everything he believed he controlled. Hours later, when Marcus returned home, drained but triumphant, he expected Olivia to be there waiting, just as she always was. But tonight, the house felt strange. There was no faint aroma of dinner, no quiet music drifting through the penthouse, only silence. He frowned, loosening his tie as he wandered through the dimly lit rooms. "Olivia?" he called out, but no answer came. Instead, he found a single note on the kitchen counter, written in her precise, unmistakable script, "Out for the evening. Don't wait up." Marcus stared at the note, an unfamiliar chill crawling up his spine. He had wanted distance, hadn't he? He glanced at his phone. No messages from her. No missed calls. Just silence. For the first time in a long while, Marcus felt something he couldn't quite define. It wasn't regret. Not yet. But something deeper, unsettling. And as he stood alone in the stillness of their home, he couldn't shake the sense that maybe, just maybe, Olivia was slipping away in ways he hadn't seen coming. What he didn't know was that she wasn't slipping away. She was stepping forward. Marcus Bennett arrived at the glass-walled conference room of the elite financial firm, a confident smirk tugging at the corners of his mouth. He adjusted his charcoal suit, the fabric hugging his broad shoulders with the flawless fit that only wealth could buy. Beside him, Rachel Collins walked B. She radiated the exact ambition Marcus valued, sharp, unflinching, and unbothered by sentiment. "This is it," she murmured, flashing him a quick, reassuring smile. "Everything we've prepped is airtight." Marcus nodded, his mind already locked on the numbers, the projections, the well-oiled pitch they had drilled to perfection. The board members could be ruthless, but with Rachel's polished delivery and his seasoned confidence, this deal would close, guaranteeing the legacy he craved. And Olivia? By day's end, she would be nothing but a distant footnote. Yet beneath the smooth arrogance, a faint unease pricked at the edge of his thoughts, a whisper of doubt he couldn't quite silence. He clenched his jaw, forcing it down. He couldn't afford to look weak now, not when every eye would measure the smile. Inside, the board members sat in a deliberate semicircle, their expressions stone cold, eyes flickering with the calculated interest reserved for billion-dollar decisions. A subtle current of tension filled the air, an undercurrent that always surfaced when the stakes were this high. Marcus settled into the chair at the head of the sleek table, placing his hands firmly on the polished wood. For a fleeting second, "Ladies and gentle," Rachel stood, clicking through a sharp PowerPoint, the screen casting a glow across the board's impassive faces, slide after slide of meticulously crafted projections and market share graphs. For a while, the mood matched Marcus's expectations. Nods, approving murmurs, the faint hum of agreement. Rachel spoke with surgical precision, her tone crisp, delivering each key point exactly as they'd planned. Marcus leaned back, watching them absorb every number, feeling every bit the king he believed himself to be. But then it shifted. Subtle, but enough. One of the senior board members, a man Marcus had collaborated with for years, cleared his throat and leaned in. "Bennett," he said, his voice measured but firm, "this all looks impressive, but something feels off." Marcus's brow lifted slightly. "Off," he repeated lightly, keeping his tone open, confident. "I'm happy to clear up any concerns you have." The man exchanged a glance with another director, and then a woman with sharp, unblinking eyes spoke up. "Your proposal glosses over risk. You're pushing expansion at a breakneck pace. But what happens if the market shifts unexpectedly? I don't see any real contingency plan here." Marcus opened his mouth to respond, but Rachel jumped in first. "We've accounted for possible shifts through our flexible financing structure," she said confidently, flipping to the next slide. "We're ready to pivot if the market demands it." The woman didn't look convinced. "That's not what I mean. You're locked on growth, but what's the fallback if that growth stalls?" Marcus felt a flicker of irritation, but kept his face perfectly calm. Beneath the table, his fingers clenched into a tight fist, the question echoing an old fear he'd buried years ago. What if he lost it all, just like before? "Our strategy is aggressive because we trust the market's potential," he said smoothly. "Sometimes you have to make bold moves to stay ahead." Another board member, an older man whose decades of experience weighed in every word, tapped his pen on the table, deep in thought. "I assume you've discussed this thoroughly with your senior advisors?" Marcus hesitated for just a split second. "Of course," he lied easily. "My entire leadership team has provided input." He could almost hear Olivia's voice in his head, calm and precise. "You're bluffing again, Marcus. And you hate when you bluff." It rattled him more than he'd admit. The older man nodded slowly but didn't say more. A thick silence filled the room, and Marcus felt an unfamiliar heaviness, an undercurrent of doubt creeping in around him. A bead of sweat prickled at his collar. He shifted slightly, desperate to keep the mask from slipping. Rachel pushed ahead, filling the gaps with her practiced lines, but the shift was unmistakable. The questions grew sharper, the expressions colder. Marcus could feel the plan unraveling thread by thread, and he couldn't pinpoint why. They had covered every angle. Or so he thought. Deep down, a voice whispered that maybe he hadn't listened closely enough, had tuned out the one person who always saw what he missed. As the meeting dragged on, Marcus's unshakable confidence began to thin. The board members remained polite but distant. Their polite nods and vague promises to revisit the proposal landed like lead in his gut. By the time he was shaking hands at the door, the smiles felt forced, courtesies masking a dismissal he couldn't deny. Once alone in the hallway, Rachel turned to him, her frustration barely hidden. "They didn't buy it," she said, shaking her head. "We need to rethink this." Marcus loosened his tie, his jaw tightening. "No. We showed them exactly what they needed to see. They just don't have the foresight to recognize it yet." But even as he spoke, a hollow pit formed in his stomach, and for the briefest moment he wondered if he was still convincing anyone at all. Rachel hesitated, then nodded, but Marcus caught the flicker of doubt in her eyes. He hated that doubt. It clung to him like static as they stepped into the elevator. He pulled out his phone, scrolling through his messages, looking for something, anything from Olivia. For years, she had always been the first to text after meetings, a line of support, an insightful note, sometimes even quiet criticism. Now nothing. And for the first time, that silence gnawed at him in a way he hadn't expected. Meanwhile, across the city, Olivia sat behind a sleek wooden desk in a private office suite, a sharp contrast to the plush elegance of the penthouse she used to hover in. She glanced at the clock, fully aware that Marcus's big presentation would be ending about now. A small part of Olivia felt a flicker of nostalgia for the days when she would have been right there beside Marcus, reading every board member's expression, catching every subtle shift in the room's energy. But today, what lay in front of her mattered far more than reliving the past. "Are you sure about this?" Jonathan Reed asked, leaning back in his chair, studying her with thoughtful eyes. "Once you pull this trigger, there's no undoing it." Olivia smiled faintly, tapping a pen against the smooth surface of her desk. I've never been more certain of anything, she said softly. Marcus believes in force. I believe in strategy. Jonathan chuckled, shaking his head with a grin. That's what I've always liked about you, Olivia. You notice things no one else does. She lowered her gaze to the documents spread out before her, the very ones outlining a move that, if it landed as planned, wouldn't just rival Marcus's proposal but bury it. People underestimate how much you learn standing quietly in the background, she murmured. But now, it's time to step forward. Jonathan lifted his glass in an easy toast. To new beginnings, then. Olivia clinked her glass lightly against his, the faint curve of her smile concealing the storm of adrenaline and resolve beneath her calm exterior. As evening settled over the city, Marcus sat alone in his study, another glass of whiskey resting on the table beside him, the burn doing nothing to dull the gnawing frustration. The pitch hadn't gone his way, and for the first time in years, a cold, persistent unease coiled in his chest. Something vital was slipping through his hands, and he didn't know how to stop it. Olivia's absence, once an afterthought, now pressed on him like a wound he couldn't ignore. He glanced at his phone, still blank. No text, no call, just silence. And deep inside, a dawning thought whispered a truth he didn't want to hear. Maybe, just maybe, he had underestimated the woman he'd so easily brushed aside. The sun dipped low behind the Los Angeles skyline, streaking Olivia Bennett's desk in shades of gold and amber as she scanned the pages before her. Every figure, every clause, every subtle line had been checked, rewritten, perfected. For years she had sat just behind Marcus's spotlight, watching him bend rooms to his charm and force of personality. But Olivia had always known that real power didn't shout. It listened, learned, and struck when the time was right. And now she was done standing behind him. She was stepping up, not as Marcus's wife, but as his equal. Her phone buzzed, breaking her focus. She glanced at the screen and saw Jonathan Reed's name light up. She answered, her voice calm, her mind sharp. "Jonathan," Olivia said. Jonathan's voice came through warm, touched with genuine admiration. "I just finished reviewing your proposal again. I have to say, it's brilliant." A small smile tugged at Olivia's lips. "I'm glad you think so," she replied smoothly. "But we're not done yet. There's still fine-tuning to do before I present it." Jonathan chuckled. "Olivia, you've really done your homework. This is exactly the kind of smart, forward-thinking pitch they're hungry for. I have no doubt it's going to turn heads." She glanced at the clock, picturing Marcus still stewing over how the board meeting had crumbled hours earlier. "Let's make sure it does," she said, her voice steady with quiet determination. "I want every line of it bulletproof." When she ended the call, Olivia exhaled slowly, letting the reality of what she'd set in motion sink in. For so long she had been Marcus's silent anchor, working late, patching holes, smoothing rough edges while he basked in the spotlight. But not anymore. Now, she was stepping out with something bigger. Something that could rewrite the rules entirely. Across town, Marcus sat alone in his corner office, staring through the floor-to-ceiling windows at the scattered glow of Los Angeles lights, each one flickering like a distant echo of the ambition he clung to. The meeting hadn't just disappointed him. It had rattled him in a way he hadn't felt in years. Even Rachel's polished delivery hadn't been enough to sway the board's skepticism over his aggressive push and flimsy backup plan. He tapped his fingers restlessly against the edge of his desk, frustration simmering beneath his tailored composure. Olivia's absence gnawed at him more than he wanted to admit. She'd always had a gift for seeing blind spots he overlooked, catching cracks before they widened. Calculated, patient. Qualities he never truly valued, until now. He eyed his phone, debating whether to call her. Pride made him scoff at himself. Instead, he sank back in his chair with a heavy sigh, trying to reason away the nagging unease. "Thinking too hard?" Rachel's voice teased him from the doorway. Marcus looked up, forcing a smile as she crossed her arms and leaned against the frame with a playful smirk. "Just replaying the mess from today," he said. Rachel stepped closer, perching herself casually on the edge of his desk. "We'll bounce back. It's just a minor hiccup." She winked, her tone light. "Besides," she added, brushing her finger along his sleeve, "you've still got me." Marcus chuckled, but it sounded empty in the quiet room. He appreciated Rachel's unwavering confidence, But the board's pointed questions still echoed in his head. They challenged exactly what Olivia had always excelled at, seeing the risks he refused to. "I need to rethink our strategy," he murmured. He muttered, rubbing his temples. "We're missing something." Rachel pressed her lips together, clearly uneasy with the sudden crack in his steady tone. "Marcus, don't tell me you're second-guessing yourself. That's not like you." He looked at her, choosing his words carefully. "It's not second-guessing," he said at last. "It's making sure we're ahead of the game." But even as he spoke, his pulse thrummed in his ears, sharp, insistent. There was an edge of fear he couldn't bury this time. The board's polite smiles replayed in his mind, a quiet mockery of the certainty he'd worn like armor for so long. But deep down, the gnawing feeling lingered. He already suspected he was a step behind. Meanwhile, Olivia sat in a quiet, elegantly lit restaurant, a glass of wine balanced between her fingers, surrounded by a small but powerful circle of investors. These were people Marcus had written off over the years, slow movers, too cautious for his taste. But Olivia saw something else, their patience, their appetite for steady growth, not reckless headlines. "I have no interest in playing the game Marcus does," she said evenly, her eyes locking with each person around the table. "We're not here for quick wins. We're here for real, sustainable value, something that lasts." The investors nodded, their intrigue clear. One of them, a poised woman with striking silver-streaked hair, leaned forward. "Olivia, what you're outlining, it's ambitious, but it's exactly where the market is leaning." Olivia smiled slightly, a quiet spark in her eyes. "Exactly." She laid out her vision with calm certainty, each word another piece falling neatly into place. For years she'd absorbed everything Marcus did, every tactic, every power play. But tonight she was building something bigger, and this time it was hers alone. Back at the penthouse, Marcus came home late. His steps felt heavy, the hush of the empty living room pressing in around him. He expected to see Olivia, waiting as always, with patient insight and a word of reassurance. But tonight, nothing. Just silence. A silence so deep it scraped at something raw inside him, reminding him how badly he needed her steadiness to anchor the chaos he'd built. He loosened his tie, poured himself a drink, and sank onto the couch, staring at the vacant spot opposite him. For the first time in longer than he cared to admit, he realized how easily he'd taken Olivia's steady presence for granted. All the nights she'd stayed up with him, editing numbers he'd sworn were perfect, pushing him to see a risk he'd brushed aside. He'd called it nagging back then. Now he would have traded anything to hear it again. He pulled out his phone, staring at her name on the screen. But something in him faltered. What could he even say? That he needed her guidance? That he might have been wrong to push her aside? That for all his power suits and boardroom bravado, the part of him that won felt smallest when she wasn't there to watch him win? He set the phone down instead, leaning back and staring at the ceiling above. The meeting had rattled him, but what truly unsettled him was the creeping truth. He had underestimated Olivia more deeply than he'd ever understood. Hours later, Olivia stepped back into the penthouse, her heels soft against the polished marble. Marcus stirred, watching her intently. There was something unmistakably different about her tonight, an air of quiet authority that threw him slightly off balance. "Where have you been?" he asked, his voice light but fishing for something. She set her bag down, met his eyes, and let a knowing smile slip across her lips. "Out." Marcus studied her, feeling the subtle but unmistakable shift in power, though he couldn't quite name it. "Big night?" Olivia just shrugged lightly. "You could say that." He wanted to push, to drag out every detail, but something deep in his gut warned him he wouldn't like the answers. So instead, he stood there, watching her disappear into their bedroom, leaving him alone in the softly lit living room, staring at his untouched drink. For the first time, Marcus felt something unfamiliar twisting in his chest. Uncertainty. Olivia wasn't just the silent supporter anymore. She was something far more formidable now. He pressed the glass to his lips, but the burn of the liquor couldn't drown the truth rising in his throat. He'd built an empire, yet somehow overlooked the only threat capable of dismantling it. Her. Marcus stepped into the penthouse again the next evening, the burden of the day pressing down heavier than usual. The fallout from the meeting clung to him, dragging at the edges of his confidence. Beyond the towering windows, the lights of Los Angeles glittered, but tonight they felt cold, almost mocking. He caught his reflection in the dark glass, a king without a crown, standing in a castle that no longer felt entirely his. Dropping his briefcase on the entryway table, he loosened his tie and called out, "Olivia?" His voice echoed into the wide, quiet space. No answer. He frowned. Olivia was always here by now, usually waiting with her calm, distant smile and a glass of wine in hand. But tonight something felt off, a nagging unease he tried to shake off as nothing more than fatigue. Stepping into the living room, he stopped cold. On the coffee table sat an immaculate stack of neatly arranged folders, an image so familiar from 1,000 late nights at the office. But these weren't his reports. Heart thumping, he moved closer, eyes narrowing at the embossed logo stamped on the top page, "Reed Investments." His fingers trembled slightly as he flipped the cover. Tiny, traitorous movements he forced himself to steady when the letters blurred for a heartbeat. A knot twisted deep in his gut. He flipped through the first few pages, hands tightening around the crisp paper. The documents mapped out a bold, visionary deal, one that could upend everything he'd been chasing, every contract, every fragile partnership. It was surgical, calculated, and brimming with the same sharp foresight he had once taken for granted in her. A foresight he'd mocked as caution, soft edges, unfit for his cutthroat boardrooms. How stupid that sounded now, echoing in his skull. His pulse kicked up. Olivia. It had to be her. Before he could steady himself, the quiet click of heels on marble made him look up. Olivia entered the room, her posture unshaken, the same calm aura she always carried. But tonight there was something new in her eyes, something that made him feel suddenly small. "I see you found the files," she said casually, pouring herself a glass of wine from the decanter on the sideboard. Her tone was calm, smooth, void of guilt, void of hesitation. Marcus turned to face her fully, confusion and disbelief fighting for space on his face. He lifted the folder slightly, his voice low but strained. "What is this?" Olivia took a slow sip of her wine, leaning back against the counter. She met his eyes evenly, her expression unreadable. "It's a deal," she said simply. "One I closed today." His jaw tightened. "With Reed? This is substantial." "Yes, it is." She set her wine down, then crossed the room and sank gracefully onto the couch, every controlled movement making him feel even more off balance. "And it's a deal you overlooked." Marcus felt his pulse hammering behind his temples. "You went behind my back." Olivia lifted a single brow, her lips curving into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Behind your back?" she echoed softly. "Marcus, I was never in front of you to begin with. You made sure of that." His fingers clenched around the pages, the weight of what was unfolding crashing into him. But pride kept him clinging to denial. "This isn't your world, Olivia," he snapped, irritation seeping into every word. "You don't understand the layers, the risk." "Oh, but I do," she cut in smoothly, folding her hands neatly in her lap. "I've been watching you for years, Marcus. Watching, learning, tracking every misstep. And while you were chasing flashy headlines, I was laying the groundwork for something bigger." He stared at her, unable to find footing in the conversation that had turned on him so quickly. Olivia, his dependable, invisible shadow, had built something monumental right under his nose. "I don't understand," he muttered, dropping into the armchair opposite her, the weight of it forcing the fight from his shoulders. "Why would you do this?" Olivia's gaze softened, but the steel beneath it didn't waver. "Because I was tired," she said evenly. "Tired of being overlooked. Tired of being the one who made sure your life never fell apart, while you never once looked at me as an equal. I got tired of waiting for you to see what I could do." Marcus opened his mouth. He needed to argue, to drag this back under control somehow, but she held up a hand, silencing him. "You thought I couldn't handle your world," she went on, her tone calm but unwavering. "What you never realized is that I was handling it for you the entire time. Quietly, carefully, and now, I'm done waiting for permission." The silence that followed pressed in, thick as concrete, stretching wide between them like a chasm he no longer knew how to cross. Olivia rose, smoothing an invisible crease from her dress. "I closed the biggest deal of your career today, Marcus," she said as she stepped past him toward the hallway, her voice as steady as ever. "And I did it without you." She disappeared down the corridor toward their bedroom, leaving him rooted to the chair, the stack of documents heavy in his hands. The truth of what had just happened settled on him like stone. He had spent so long underestimating her. He had never seen her coming. Marcus had spent years believing Olivia didn't belong in his world, never once imagining she might one day surpass him in it. He looked around the penthouse, the pristine decor, the trophies of his so-called success, and for the first time, it all felt strangely hollow. His gaze drifted back to the contract in his hands. Her signature stood out, clean and intentional at the bottom of the pages. A final, undeniable truth. Olivia wasn't just his wife anymore. She was his competitor now. And deep down, Marcus couldn't decide if the stronger feeling was fury or reluctant awe. The night dragged on, but sleep never came. He lay awake beside her, eyes fixed on the ceiling as every detail of the evening played on repeat in his mind. Olivia had outmaneuvered him with a calm precision he'd never seen coming. How had he missed it? Had he lost his edge? Or worse, had he ever truly been ahead at all? When she had been quietly moving pieces all along? Hours later, Olivia shifted next to him, her breathing deep and steady, like she hadn't just turned his carefully built world upside down. Marcus turned his head, watching her in the muted light spilling through the curtains. And for the first time in years, Marcus Bennett felt something he hardly recognized. Doubt. The next day, he sat in his office, staring out over the sprawl of Los Angeles, the skyline blurred by the weight pressing behind his eyes. The documents Olivia had left were spread across his desk now. Pages flipped and reflipped, as if reading them one more time would reveal a flaw, some small misstep that would let him regain control. But there was none. She hadn't just stepped into his territory, she had mastered it, quietly, surgically, while he'd been too arrogant to see it coming. He exhaled a hard breath, drumming his fingers on the mahogany. The board meeting hadn't been a catastrophe, but it had fallen flat. No spark, no conviction. Now he knew exactly why. Olivia had already moved the game pieces behind his back while he was too busy admiring his reflection in the glass walls of this very office. His phone buzzed, snapping him back. He glanced down, half expecting Rachel's name to pop up with some hollow reassurance. But the message came from an unknown number. He hesitated, then tapped it open. "I hope you're starting to see things clearly now. I'll be in touch soon." No signature. But he didn't need one. Olivia's words, typed or spoken, always cut straight through him. Marcus leaned back, the leather chair groaning under his shifting weight. His mind wandered back to the beginning, to a version of Olivia who had once been the steady voice guiding him when his ambitions threatened to devour them both. But now she had a voice all her own. And for the first time, Marcus understood exactly how much that terrified him. She had never craved the spotlight, always content to steady his reckless ambitions with quiet wisdom from behind the scenes. And now, Olivia had proven not only that she could keep up, but that she could surpass him in ways Marcus had never dared imagine. His pride stung like an open wound, but beneath it flickered something else he couldn't quite deny. Admiration. "Mr. Bennett?" Rachel's voice sliced through his thoughts as she strode into his office, her heels tapping crisply across the marble floor. A clipboard was tucked under her arm, concern barely hidden behind her professional calm. "The team's asking for an update on the acquisition plan. They want to know if we're still pushing ahead." Marcus pinched the bridge of his nose, exhaustion settling into his bones. "We need to reassess," he muttered, frustration cutting through every word. "We're missing something big." Rachel frowned, shifting her weight as she studied him. "You mean Olivia?" His eyes snapped up, narrowing. "What did you say?" Rachel lifted a shoulder, feigning nonchalance, though the flicker in her eyes betrayed her curiosity. "Come on, Marcus. It's obvious. Everyone's talking about it, about how Olivia pulled this off. They're wondering how much she knew, how long she's been planning it." Marcus's jaw clenched so tight it ached. "She didn't just stumble into this," he said, voice low, almost to himself. "She's been watching, waiting." Rachel perched on the edge of his desk, crossing her legs as she eyed him carefully. "So what's next? You're not seriously going to let her overshadow you, are you?" He stared at the sprawling skyline beyond the windows, fists curling at his sides. "No," he murmured, more to the empty room than to her. "I need to understand exactly how she did this, what I missed." Rachel leaned in, her tone softer but edged with truth that stung. "Marcus, if I can be blunt, you got comfortable." She didn't. Her words hit harder than he'd admit, because deep down, he knew she was right. Olivia had been there the entire time, quietly absorbing everything he ignored, turning his blind spots into her advantage. Later that night, Marcus found himself standing outside the penthouse door, staring at the handle like it might hold the answers he so desperately needed. Inside, the world he'd built with Olivia now felt foreign, untouchable. He stepped in to find her by the fireplace, a book balanced in her lap, a glass of wine within reach. She looked up as he entered, her eyes calm, steady, unreadable in a way that rattled him to his core. "Working late?" she asked, turning a page without breaking eye contact. Marcus loosened his tie, stepping closer but feeling like an intruder in his own home. "You could say that," he said, his voice lacking its usual certainty. "Looks like you've been busy too." Olivia's lips curved faintly at the edges, but she stayed silent, letting him flounder in the quiet she now commanded. He sank into the armchair opposite her, studying her face, searching for any trace of the woman he thought he knew so completely. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked at last, the question raw despite his effort to sound composed. She closed the book gently, setting it on the side table with deliberate care. "Tell you what, Marcus, that you were working on this. That you were planning something this big, behind my back." Olivia leaned back, folding her hands in her lap, her eyes locked on his. "Because, Marcus, you never asked, and honestly, would you have listened if I had?" He opened his mouth to argue, to push back, to reclaim even a shred of control, but the words dissolved before they ever left his lips. Because he knew she was right. He had spent so long casting her as his supporting role, he'd never stopped to imagine she might have been the main player all along. "She might have had ambitions of her own all these years," Marcus murmured, shaking his head slowly. "You were just waiting." Olivia lifted her glass, taking a calm sip before answering. "Not waiting, Marcus. Preparing." The silence that settled between them was thick, dense with all the truths he'd ignored for far too long. Marcus, the man who always prided himself on having answers for everything, now sat across from the one person who had outmaneuvered him without him ever seeing it coming. And deep down, a raw panic clawed at him. If she could hide this strength from him for so long, what else had he never seen? "So what now?" he asked at last, his voice lower, the sharp edge dulled by something rawer. Uncertainty. Olivia studied him, her expression still unreadable. When she finally spoke, her words landed heavy in the quiet. "That depends on you." Marcus leaned forward, elbows propped on his knees, his voice almost fragile in the hush of the room. "Olivia, I don't know if I can fix this." Each word scraped at his pride. He'd never spoken to her like this, never let her see the fear behind the armor. She looked at him steadily, her tone even, unforgiving but not cruel. "It's not about fixing it, Marcus. It's about finally recognizing what's right in front of you, before it's too late." And for the first time, he didn't just see her as the patient, supportive wife he'd tucked neatly behind him for years. He saw her as someone entirely separate, powerful enough to stand on her own, and it terrified him more than losing a contract ever could. A corner of his mind whispered that maybe she'd never needed him at all. Long after she left him sitting there, Marcus stayed in the dimly lit room, her words circling in his mind like an echo he couldn't shut out. He had always told himself that real success was about control, about staying 3 steps ahead. But maybe, just maybe, he'd never understood what real strength looked like at all. He pressed the heel of his palm against his eye, fighting back a bitter laugh at how blind he'd been, how sure he was that love meant keeping her small enough to never threaten him. And in that rare hush, for the first time in his life, Marcus Bennett felt something he'd avoided for years: regret. Marcus stood in his office later, staring at the sprawl of Los Angeles through the vast glass windows. The familiar skyline that once anchored him in confidence now looked cold, untouched by the chaos inside him. The city pulsed on with or without him, and that truth hollowed him out more than he cared to admit. He felt like an old statue, impressive from a distance, cracking where no one could see. He raked a hand through his hair, tugged at his loosened tie, feeling the last week pressing down on him like a storm he couldn't outmaneuver. Olivia's move, sharp, clean, and unstoppable, had cracked him at the center. For years he'd believed she was satisfied in the background, grateful even. Now he saw the truth in brutal clarity. She hadn't just played along. She'd studied him, learned him, and when her moment came, she hadn't hesitated. His phone buzzed sharply on the desk, dragging him back. Rachel's name lit up the screen. With a heavy sigh, he picked up. "We need to talk," Rachel said, her tone brisk, more clipped than usual. "I know," Marcus replied, pressing a thumb to his temple. "Come by in an hour." An hour later, Rachel strode into his office. Even her poised walk carried an undercurrent of strain this time. She dropped a folder on his desk and crossed her arms, her eyes cutting straight to the heart of it. "Marcus, the situation with Olivia, it's not going to just blow over. People are talking. Investors are starting to doubt your grip on things." Marcus scoffed, leaning back with an arrogance he barely felt anymore. "So what? They think I've lost my edge because Olivia closed one deal?" But even as the words left his mouth, he heard the hollowness in them, a bluff no longer backed by the iron certainty he once wore so easily. Rachel exhaled, her frustration clear. "It's not just about the deal, Marcus. It's about perception. You built your empire on being the guy who always had control, who was always 10 steps ahead. But now it looks like you never even saw this coming." Her words stung, more than he'd admit, but Marcus couldn't argue. The cracks in his perfectly crafted image were starting to show, and he hated how exposed it made him feel. He pressed a thumb to the corner of his eye, masking the flicker of panic crawling up the back of his neck. How had he let it get this far, without seeing her coming? He glanced at the folder Rachel had dropped on his desk. "What's this?" "A breakdown of Olivia's new deal," Rachel said, her voice tight with restrained frustration. "I had my team dig deep. Marcus, it's airtight." He flipped through the pages, eyes darting across the numbers, the projections, the strategy behind it all. It was smart, sustainably smart. Controlled growth, minimized risk, long-term payoff. Everything his high-octane approach never prioritized. Each line on the page felt like a quiet reprimand from a woman he dismissed as cautious, soft, too gentle for the battlefield he called business. Now that gentleness was eating him alive. Rachel sank into the chair opposite him, her stare unflinching. "We need to counter this. Fast. If we sit on it, she'll keep gaining momentum." Marcus closed the folder and exhaled slowly, almost to himself. "We," he repeated, quieter than before. "Rachel, I need to figure this out." His voice cracked a fraction on the last word, softer, smaller than she'd ever heard it. She cocked her head, her voice sharpening. "Marcus, this is business. We handle it like business." He met her eyes, really met them, for the first time in longer than he could remember. Rachel was all tactics, all cold execution, good at what she did, but she didn't understand Olivia. Not like he should have. Not like he used to, back when she'd sit beside him late at night, pushing a mug of tea into his hands and murmuring doubts he'd always brushed off as needless worry. "I need to talk to her," he said finally, pushing his chair back as he stood. Rachel rolled her eyes. "And say what? Congrats on making me look foolish? Marcus, you need to think about the next move. Not dwell on what's already done." But for once, he wasn't so sure. Charging ahead had always been his instinct. But now, all he could feel was the pull of something he'd abandoned for too long, understanding what he'd overlooked. He needed to see her eyes, hear her say it straight. He needed to face what it cost him to never listen. That evening, Marcus came home earlier than he had in weeks. Olivia sat in the living room, her laptop open on the coffee table, her focus unwavering. She didn't look up when he walked in. The faint hum of classical piano filled the air, a softness that clashed with the tension vibrating between them. He cleared his throat. "We need to talk." Olivia flicked her gaze to him, cool and unreadable. "About what?" Marcus hesitated, then sank into the chair across from her, the words tasting unfamiliar on his tongue. "About everything. The deal. Us. Where we're going." She shut her laptop with slow precision and set it aside. When she spoke, her tone cut deeper than any boardroom verdict. "Marcus, you've never cared about us unless it impacted your business. What's different now?" He dragged a hand through his hair, the weight of it all pressing hard against his chest. Maybe I should have." The admission scraped at something raw inside him, but for once he let it. Olivia studied him quietly for a long moment, like she was trying to decide if what she saw in front of her was worth believing anymore. Then she leaned back against the couch, crossing her legs with calm composure. "You always assumed I was just along for the ride, that I didn't have ambitions of my own." Marcus nodded, his throat tight. "I did, and I was wrong." Her lips curved into a small smile, not one of triumph but of quiet understanding. "Marcus, I didn't do this to hurt you," she said softly. "I did it because I needed to prove to myself that I could." He looked away, staring at the floor as her words sank deeper than he'd expected. "And now that you have?" Olivia exhaled, her tone steady but soft. "Now I have options." That hit harder than anything else. He'd always assumed Olivia would be there. Unchanging, unwavering, the constant in his ever-evolving empire. But now she had choices. Choices that didn't necessarily include him. "What do you want, Olivia?" he asked, his voice lower than before. She looked at him with a gaze that was both gentle and unwavering. "I want to be seen, to be valued, not just as your wife, but as someone capable of standing alone." Marcus nodded slowly, each word lodging somewhere deep in him. For the first time, he truly saw her, not as the quiet presence in his shadow, but as someone who had always been right beside him, waiting for him to notice. "I see you now," he said, the words foreign on his tongue, yet somehow truer than anything he'd said in years. Olivia smiled faintly, and for a fleeting moment, Marcus felt the smallest flicker of hope. But whether that hope would be enough to bridge the chasm between them, only time would tell. As the night stretched on, they sat in silence, each lost in thoughts neither was ready to share aloud. A turning point had arrived, but where it would take them remained unclear. The morning sun spilled through the tall windows of the penthouse, casting long streaks of light across the glossy marble floor. Marcus Bennett sat at the dining table, his hands loosely cradling a cup of coffee that had long gone cold. He stared into the dark swirl, haunted by truths that clawed at him like an old wound split open. The night before had stripped him bare in ways no failed deal ever could. He'd spent years believing he controlled everything. His career, his marriage, his legacy. But Olivia's quiet, flawless checkmate had demolished that myth with a single, undeniable fact. She hadn't just survived without him. She'd thrived. The soft rustle of footsteps snapped him back. Olivia entered the kitchen, dressed in a tailored navy blazer and a matching skirt that framed her with effortless poise. Her hair was pinned neatly, and the faint trace of her perfume filled the air as she passed him. Without a word, she poured herself a cup of tea, her motions measured and precise, an echo of the quiet certainty she now wore like armor. Marcus watched her, taking in every detail. There was something newly unshakable in the way she moved, in the way she didn't shrink from his gaze, and it rattled him to his bones. "Busy day?" he asked, trying for a casual tone that fell embarrassingly flat. Olivia met his gaze over the rim of her teacup, her eyes steady, cool, impossible to read. "Productive," she corrected softly, with a faint smile that made it clear the difference mattered. Marcus exhaled, setting his coffee down with a muted clink. "You're meeting with Reed today?" She nodded, taking a slow sip. "Yes, we're finalizing the second phase of the deal." His stomach nodded. The second phase. It meant this wasn't a one-time play. She was building on her momentum, moving forward without hesitation, without him. He searched for the right words, something that wouldn't sound desperate, something that might tether him back into her orbit. "Olivia, I didn't see this coming." She arched a brow, setting her cup down with a quiet grace that contrasted the sharp weight of her reply. "Didn't you?" Her voice was calm, but edged with an honesty that cut deep. "Or did you just not want to?" He swallowed, his throat dry. "I didn't think you. I never thought you wanted this, to be involved like this." Olivia let out a soft laugh, though there was no humor in it. "Marcus, I've always been involved. It was just convenient for you not to see it." He leaned forward, his elbows braced on the table like a man trying to stop a landslide with his bare hands. "That's not fair." Her face stayed composed, but her eyes softened just slightly. "Isn't it?" A silence settled between them, heavy with all the words they'd never said and the truths he'd been too arrogant to notice. Marcus, the man who always claimed to have the answers, was now sitting across from the one person who had quietly outgrown him while he wasn't looking. "I don't want to lose you," he said finally, his voice smaller than he intended. Olivia studied him for a long moment, her expression touched with sadness, and something more final, acceptance. "Marcus, this isn't about losing or winning," she said gently. "It's about acknowledging that I have my own path now, and I can't keep waiting for you to catch up." His throat tightened further. "Then, let me be part of it." She leaned back in her chair, crossing her legs with a quiet poise that felt like a wall he couldn't scale anymore. "I don't know if that's possible anymore," she admitted softly. "For years, I waited for you to see me as your equal. But now that I've stepped forward, I don't know if I can go back to who I was before." Marcus looked away, guilt pressing down like an iron weight in his chest. He'd spent so long building his empire, never realizing how much of its foundation had been Olivia. Steady, overlooked, and stronger than he'd ever given her credit for. And now she was building something of her own, something that no longer needed to revolve around him. "I can change," he said, his voice raw, sincere in a way he hadn't been in years. Olivia smiled, but it was a sad smile, the kind that said she'd already considered that possibility and moved far past it. "Some things can't be undone, Marcus." He nodded slowly, the truth settling inside him like a stone he couldn't lift. "So, what now?" Olivia stood, adjusting her blazer with a quiet finality that left no room for pleading. "Now, I move forward. And you figure out what that means for you." He watched her gather her things, every heartbeat pounding louder than the last. "Olivia," he said, the desperation bleeding through despite himself, "I want to support you." She paused at the door, turning back to him with an expression that held equal parts kindness and unshakable resolve. "Then support me by letting me grow." And with that, she walked out, leaving Marcus alone in the vast, echoing penthouse they had once called theirs. Later that afternoon, Marcus found himself at his office window, staring down at the restless pulse of Los Angeles below. The city carried on without him, oblivious to the chaos tearing him apart from the inside out. He thought about calling Rachel, about summoning the team to brainstorm a counterattack, to claw back the ground he'd lost. But something anchored his hand. Instead, he pulled out his phone and scrolled through old photos. Him and Olivia laughing in sunlit places, frozen moments from a time when us meant more than strategy and appearances. He paused on an anniversary photo taken in Paris. Her smile genuine, his arm around her shoulders, the world simple for a fleeting moment. He exhaled shakily and made a choice. He didn't want to fight Olivia. He wanted to understand her. Grabbing his coat, he left the office without a word, crossing the city toward her new headquarters. He stood outside the glass entrance for a long time, watching her through the window as she spoke animatedly to a small circle of investors. She looked radiant, sure of herself, commanding without force, unapologetically hers. For the first time in so many years, Marcus saw her fully. And for the first time, he wondered if it was too late to stand by her side instead of behind her. He turned away, accepting that this wasn't about reclaiming what he'd lost. It was about proving, to her and to himself, that he could be more than the man who once stood alone at the top. That maybe, just maybe, he could learn to stand beside her as an equal, the way he never had before. That evening, the scent of rain clung to the air as Marcus Bennett stood on the balcony of his penthouse, staring out over the city he once thought he ruled. The skyline stretched far and glittered brightly, each tower a monument to his restless ambition. Yet tonight, it all felt strangely distant, like a reflection of a life he didn't quite recognize anymore. His fingers curled tight around the steel railing, knuckles whitening as he wrestled with the storm of thoughts that had been haunting him for days. It had been a week since Olivia walked out with that calm unshakable grace that refused to fade from his mind. A week since he'd watched her leave him standing in the ruins of his certainty. And now, alone in the place that had once been their shared fortress, the silence pressed against him, louder than any city noise, louder than his pride. He glanced down at his phone, the screen still lit with her message from earlier that day. "I think we both know this is for the best." For the best. The words looped through his mind, twisting themselves into something sharp and mocking. He'd spent years believing the life they'd built, his life, rested on bedrock. But now it felt like sand running through his clenched fists. The faint click of the door opening snapped him from the thought. He turned, half hoping to see Olivia there. half dreading it. But instead, Rachel stepped inside, her expression a carefully managed mask as she shut the door behind her. She watched him for a moment, eyes scanning him like she was measuring a man she no longer fully recognized. "You missed the meeting today," she said evenly. Marcus sighed, rubbing the back of his neck as if trying to loosen the knot lodged there. "I know. I just needed time." Rachel's mouth tightened to a thin line. "That's not you, Marcus. The investors are spooked. They're asking questions I can't answer." He held her gaze, his jaw tightening. "Maybe I don't have answers anymore." Rachel blinked, caught off guard by the bluntness. "That's not the Marcus Bennett I know." A bitter half-smile tugged at his mouth. "Maybe you never really knew me." She crossed the room, pausing by the large marble coffee table littered with untouched reports and thick strategy binders. Her fingertip tapped a sleek folder at the top of the stack. "Olivia's deal with Reed, it's got people talking. They're saying she's playing the long game, and we're scrambling just to react." Marcus exhaled, the sound long and hollow, before sinking deeper into the leather armchair behind him. "Because she is," he admitted, eyes fixed on the ceiling as if it might offer absolution. "She's always been patient, methodical. I just never gave her the credit she deserved." Rachel folded her arms, studying him like a puzzle she couldn't solve. "So what now, Marcus? Are you going to push back, or just watch her outpace you?" He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, the weight of it all slumping his shoulders. "It's not about winning anymore, Rachel." He paused, dragging a hand down his face. "Maybe it never really was." Rachel frowned, her voice edged with the tension that always braced her spine. "Marcus, we built this company on your vision, your drive. You don't get to question that now." He looked up at her, and for the first time, there was something raw and unguarded in his eyes. Something that made her shift uncomfortably. "What if I've been driving in the wrong direction this whole time?" The words landed between them, like a crack splitting the marble under their feet. Rachel had no quick retort, no ready fix. After a moment, she straightened her posture, gathering her composure the way she always did before a high-stakes pitch. "You've got one chance to fix this," she said quietly, "if you want to take it." Marcus watched Rachel leave, the sharp click of her heels fading into the vast hush that swallowed the room behind her. He looked down at the folder on the table, Olivia's name typed cleanly across the cover. His fingertips traced the edge of the paper, the simple detail stirring a complicated swirl of admiration and regret deep in his chest. The next morning, Marcus found himself sitting outside a small cafe tucked into the heart of the financial district. His fingers drummed nervously against the side of his coffee cup, a restless rhythm that matched the churn in his head. Olivia arrived precisely on time, her stride steady, her expression calm but unreadable as she slipped into the seat across from him. "You look good," he said awkwardly, his voice breaking the quiet like a stone dropped into still water. Olivia gave a polite, fleeting smile that never quite reached her eyes. "I am good, Marcus." She stirred her tea slowly, her eyes on him, patient but curious. "Why did you ask me to meet you?" He leaned back in his chair, exhaling as if bracing himself for an impact. "I wanted to talk. About us. About everything." She raised an eyebrow. "Everything?" He nodded, feeling the words heavy in his mouth. "I've been doing a lot of thinking, Olivia, about how I treated you, how I just took you for granted." Olivia's eyes softened at the edges, but she said nothing, letting him finish. "I always told myself I was the one holding everything together," he went on, voice lower now. "But the truth is, you were, and I was too blind to see it." He dropped his gaze to his hands, a small, bitter laugh slipping out. "I'm sorry for that." Olivia set her cup down gently, her tone steady but unwavering. "Marcus, I appreciate that, I do, but apologies don't change what's already happened." "I know," he said quickly. "I'm not asking for anything. I wanted you to know that I see it now. I see you now." She studied him for a long moment, searching his face for traces of the man he used to be. Then she nodded, slow and certain. "I hope you do," she said softly. "Because I've changed, Marcus. I'm not the same woman who waited quietly for you to notice me." He felt a sharp ache behind his ribs. "I know," he murmured. "And honestly, I think that's what scares me the most." Olivia's smile was small, touched with a sadness that felt more honest than any farewell. You'll be okay, Marcus. You always find a way to land on your feet. He laughed once, a dry sound edged with something fragile. Maybe, but for once, I wish I'd landed with you. She reached across the table, her hand warm over his for a fleeting heartbeat. Then she pulled away, her touch leaving behind a ghost of comfort and an unspoken goodbye. Take care of yourself, Marcus. He watched her go, her silhouette folding into the flow of the morning crowd, until she was just another figure moving forward. And for the first time in a long time, Marcus Bennett felt something close to closure, an ending he hadn't wanted, but maybe, finally, the one he needed. Adrian often stayed at the office past midnight, moving from one meeting to the next. Among his newest hires was the driven and sharp Amelia Rhodes, a young marketing executive fresh out of Duke. Adrian spotted her potential immediately. She was articulate, self-assured, and possessed a competitive fire that reflected his own. Meanwhile, Nina immersed herself in philanthropic work. She collaborated with the Beckett Initiative, a charitable organization Adrian had established, dedicated to awarding scholarships to aspiring artists from underprivileged backgrounds. She was genuinely excited to give back and to channel her design talent into community-focused projects. Yet amidst their packed schedules, Adrian and Nina found themselves drifting apart. The lazy Saturday mornings, tangled in bed, became rare. Their quiet Sunday reading rituals on the veranda faded into rushed phone calls and barely touched breakfasts, before Adrian dashed off to charm another investor. Nina would stand by the door some mornings, watching him adjust his tie in the mirror, wanting so badly to reach for him, to ask him to stay 5 more minutes, but swallowing the words every time. Nina did her best to be patient, constantly reminding herself that this was what success demanded. Still, pangs of loneliness crept in. They came late at night, when the side of the bed where Adrian should have been stayed cool to the touch. They came when she caught herself humming lullabies to an empty living room, wondering if he even remembered the way they used to dream together. She decided to confide in her closest friend, Tessa Marino, over herbal tea at a chic cafe in Brickell. He's just so distant these days, Nina admitted quietly, stirring her drink. Her throat tightened around the confession. It was the first time she'd said it out loud instead of pretending everything was fine. His eyes light up when he talks about Beckett developments. But with me, it's like he's always somewhere else. Tessa, who had known Adrian since he and Nina began dating, tried to offer comfort. He's just swamped, love. Running a multi-million-dollar empire isn't exactly light work. Nina nodded slowly, though the unease in her chest remained. She pressed her lips together, forcing herself to smile at Tessa's words. But deep down, she couldn't shake the fear that maybe it wasn't just the work that kept him away. It was her. She held on to the hope that starting a family would bring them back together, that their marriage would regain the intimacy it once had. The news came on a perfectly ordinary Wednesday morning. Nina, queasy for days, took a pregnancy test before heading to a site visit. The 2 pink lines appeared instantly. She gasped, covering her mouth with trembling fingers as a tear slipped down her cheek. Part relief, part disbelief, part desperate hope that this was the sign they needed. A rush of joy and nervous wonder surged through her. She had always dreamed of having children, and Adrian had once spoken with passion about being a dad, teaching his son or daughter how to face the world with courage. She imagined their home filled with laughter, toys scattered across the sunroom, festive holiday dinners with extended family. She pictured Adrian lifting a giggling baby into the air, his work phone nowhere in sight, his eyes only on them, on what they'd built together. Nina picked up her phone and dialed Adrian. No answer. He was likely in the middle of a high-stakes call. Unable to hold it in, she left a message, her voice trembling with emotion. Adrian, call me as soon as you can. I have some news. He returned the call a few hours later, breathless. Hey, I've got 5 minutes before the next pitch. Everything okay? Nina paused, aching that she couldn't tell him face to face, but the words spilled out anyway. I'm pregnant, Adrian. We're having a baby. A moment of silence. Then, Nina, that's incredible, really. I'm so happy. His sincerity caught her off guard. She heard the awe in his voice, and tears filled her eyes. She pressed a hand over her belly, whispering in her heart, Please, let this bring him back to me. It was her quiet prayer to the tiny life inside her, that this time Adrian wouldn't drift so far away. He promised they'd celebrate, just the two of them. That night, Adrian came home by 7, the earliest in months, with a bouquet of Nina's favorite pale yellow tulips in hand. They ordered Thai takeout, but the food went untouched. They were too wrapped up in excited talk of their baby's future. He didn't truly need to be there, but something deep inside him needed proof, needed to see for himself what she had built. As he lingered across the street, Nathan watched Mara step outside, moving with the same graceful confidence he had always known. She was on the phone, deep in discussion, but even from where he stood, Nathan could read the quiet satisfaction in her expression. It struck him how easily she now fit into a world he once thought was too ruthless for her softness. It wasn't softness at all. It was quiet steel he'd mistaken for fragility. Their eyes locked from across the road, and something flickered inside him. Pride, regret, admiration, and maybe the faintest trace of longing. Mara acknowledged him with a subtle nod before sliding into a waiting rideshare, leaving him alone on the bustling sidewalk. She had moved forward. It was time he did too. As the car pulled away, Nathan stayed rooted to the concrete, letting the rush of city noise wash over the hollow space she left behind. That night, back in his high-rise apartment overlooking downtown Atlanta, Nathan sat nursing a glass of bourbon, his eyes fixed on the contract Mara had closed, the very deal that now overshadowed every accomplishment he'd ever claimed as his own. It wasn't just the impressive numbers. It was her approach, calm, patient, grounded in a wisdom he'd once dismissed as too cautious, too gentle. How many times had he brushed her ideas aside at late-night strategy sessions, insisting she didn't see the bigger picture? And now, the bigger picture stared him in the face, hers, not his. He reached for his phone, thumb hesitating over her name in his contacts. After a long silence, he pressed call. Mara picked up on the second ring. "Nathan," she answered, her tone composed but unmistakably detached. I wanted to say congratulations," he said, absent-mindedly swirling his drink. "You did great." The words felt heavier than they should have, like an apology hidden inside a simple compliment. A pause, then a soft laugh from her end. "Thank you, Nathan. That means a lot." Her voice was so calm, so unbothered, it almost broke him more than if she'd yelled. He lingered in that quiet before admitting, "I was wrong about you." His throat tightened as he said it. 3 small words too late to matter, but maybe not too late to mean something. She didn't gloat, didn't rush to forgive. She simply said, without a trace of bitterness, "I know." A small, tired smile tugged at his lips. So what now? It was half a question for her, half a question for himself. What now, when the person he underestimated had risen so far beyond him? Her voice gentled just slightly. "Now I keep going, and I hope you do too." He nodded, even though she couldn't see him. "Take care, Mara." "You too, Nathan." As he ended the call, something inside him gave way, a sense of release he hadn't known he needed. The sweetest revenge, he realized, wasn't in proving himself better than Mara. It was in finally recognizing she'd outgrown him. And maybe that wasn't a loss at all. He inhaled deeply, lifted his glass in a quiet toast to Mara, to himself, and to whatever waited ahead. The game was finished. It was time to begin again. So the story is over, my wonderful friends. And if you're still here with me at this hour, then maybe, just maybe, something in Marcus and Olivia's journey has found its way to your heart. Let's look at it together, not as a distant story, but as a gentle reminder about the quiet truths we often bury in our busy lives. This story is not just about betrayal or power. It's about awareness, the courage to see what's always been there but too easy to overlook. Olivia was never just Marcus's silent partner. She was the foundation he'd built everything on. And when that foundation chose itself over him, he finally learned, sometimes too late, that real strength lives in the quiet, steady hearts beside us, not in the noise we chase. It's a lesson we can carry into our own messy, beautiful lives. The quieter you become, the more you can hear. That simple truth, whispered by spiritual thinkers for centuries, lives here too. We rush, we strive, we build empires big or small, but often forget the people who steady our hands when they shake. So tonight, I invite you and myself to pause. Look at who's been there for you. Look at the pieces of yourself you've silenced because the world said ambition is louder than care. Maybe, like Marcus, you'll realize it's never too late to stand beside those people or to become that steady force for yourself. As you close this chapter, remember, real power isn't proving we're better than someone. Real power is seeing someone fully, loving them deeply, and letting them grow, even if it means they grow beyond us. If this story moved you even a little, if it tugged at a truth you'd forgotten, please like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe to this channel so we can keep exploring stories that remind us to see what matters before it's gone. Thank you for staying awake with me tonight. May you always choose what's real, even when it's quiet.